So this is, like I said, this is Teaching Geeks to Fish 2. Teaching Geeks to Fish was the title of my talk in Prague, and that was from the old saying: if you give someone a fish, they eat for a day. If you teach someone to fish, they eat for a lifetime. This is about, I will cover the stuff I covered in Prague very briefly, and I will talk about what's happened since then. So this is basically me looking back after about 18 months of giving this course, what's worked, what hasn't worked, with really a focus on, if you want to do something like this, what are some of the lessons learned? This is very much, I'm a particular kind of weirdo, and I'm working in a particular kind of organization. So some of the stuff that I do is very me or very TomTom. But I'm also know that it's a useful thing to do if we're talking about teaching other people to write. So I'd like to be able to help you do your own particular weird things for your own particular weird organizations. And as part of that as well, yeah, please ask questions as I go. I've got this presentation set up so it's completely elastic. I can talk for any length of time. It just depends how many examples I throw in. But I'd much rather be answering questions than telling little stories, because I have a ton of little stories and I can go on and on. Okay, so yeah, teaching geeks to fish, learning to fly, because we're moving on from just being fish at this point. Little background on me first. Yeah, my name is Abi Sutherland. I'm the information architect in product unit navigation at TomTom, which is to say one section of TomTom, but not all of TomTom. I'm the only information architect in TomTom because our different product units do things very differently. We have a lot of autonomy about how we do things. And so one of the things that my product unit said is there some way we can do documentation without hiring a fleet of 7 or 8 documentarians, because we'd rather hire developers. Let's be blunt, that's what they didn't say, but that's what they meant. So they hired the person who would not shut up about the quality of our documentation. PU Navigation has over 300 people. Our users are mostly developers. So we have products for developers. We have pieces of functionality. When I say 2+ SDKs, we've got SDKs for a couple of different systems, but then we've got them for different platforms. We've got them with and without various accessories. So anywhere from 2 to about 6 SDKs, depending on how you count it. Plus, we have an API that's online and publicly available on our developer portal. Plus, we have about 50 internal interfaces of various sorts, which are documented more for our internal TomTom people and people who use our stuff. It gets complicated, but our audience is developers. So, yeah, my job, improve our documentation. My fearless team. Hi. And that was the riddle. What do I do with this? And my first thought is, okay, if you can't make it work with the rules, change the rules. So here's my fearless team. This is PU Navigation at our last hackathon. And I figured if I've got this many people writing, we can make it work. So then the next trick is, how do I get that to happen? Because, of course, they're developers, and I always had this conversation. The conversation goes, developers don't write. I'll say. They can't write, they don't know how to write, and they hate writing. And I would say, wait. No, they don't write, and they feel like they can't write, and they hate writing because they don't know how to write. And I can fix that. Because I have friends who run writing workshops, and I talk a lot, so somewhere among those things, I can probably sort something out. And the thing I sorted out is a course called Tech Writing for Techies. And I call it Technical Writing for Techies not because I have ever said to anybody, you're not techie enough, get out of my classroom, but because the people who need the most reassurance that it is for them are the techies. If I talk to anybody else, product owners and like that, they're like, yeah, I could use to learn to write, but developers are like, please don't do this to me. So yeah, I was also focusing on non-native speakers in particular because in TomTom that's the majority of us. We do not actually have a lot of native speakers of English around, and the ones we have are also not people who were in love with the idea of writing. That's why they got into technology, but I needed to make sure we were hitting non-native speakers particularly, and I wanted to make sure we were getting people who wanted to improve their technical writing and trying not to drag too many people in by the hair if they didn't want to be there. And Geeks was just part of our crowd, but I used that. The course is pretty long, 3.5 to 4 hours, but there are breaks in there, and there are exercises in there. I take 6 to 8 students per session, and the reason why is if you take more than 8, then some people can hide in the corners. And I want them all participating. It isn't a lot of mandatory participation, but I want everybody engaged. And so at above 8, you start to struggle with that. Below 6, and I don't get enough conversation. So I like having people asking questions, breaking in, interacting. I've got 97 slides, which is way a lot, but that's because the slide deck is a reference source. And so I'm teaching from the slides, but then I'm expecting people to forget about 3/4 of what I teach them, but be able to go back, relearn it on the slide deck if they need it. And I've got a couple of group exercises, well, one group and one individual, to nail things down in there. So here's the agenda from the course. This is actually, as you can see by the different slide styling, this is actually ganked from the course deck itself. So I start with introductions, which is I introduce myself. I go around the table and have everybody introduce themselves. And then I introduce the course. What is this course? How is this to work with us? Because it's kind of the third presence in the room. And then we go over a piece of homework I have them do before the course. I have them spend no more than half an hour writing instructions on putting on a jacket. And I give them no further information. If they ask me a question, say that's an excellent question. Because what I want to do is I want them to try it out, and I want them to think about what questions you have to ask before you can do this kind of thing. And then when they come in, we go around the table. And I ask everybody, so, how did it go? What was good? What was difficult? What are you happy with? What did you think about? What questions did you ask yourself? But the reason I do that is not just to find out how it went. It's also to find out where they already know things and to tell them they already know. So somebody will say, so I was really asking myself who I would do these instructions for. And I'll say, that's a really good point. Understanding who your audience is really important. So I'm glad that you pointed that one out. Somebody else will say, well, so I figured I was going to need to explain what a sleeve is and what a zipper is, and I had to look up these words. And I go, absolutely. Word choice is really important. Figuring out what vocabulary you're going to use and being able to define it, that's a really great point. Thank you for bringing that up. And that way I can go through and I can tell them that they already know stuff. And then they find it a lot easier to learn more stuff, which is what I'm trying to do here. Then we talk about the writing process, and I've got different methodologies and like that, but the focus there is start by planning, thinking about your audience, thinking really hard about your audience. When you write a rough draft and don't worry about the quality. I emphasize that so much. Your first draft can stink. It can be terrible. That's fine. Please feel free. I actually offer people a signed certificate of permission to write badly, which they can frame and put above their desks if that's what they need, whatever it takes. And then I teach them that editing is a separate process and how to do that. And that allows them to feel like they don't have to rewrite the first half of the first sentence for an hour, which some people do. Then we take a break. Then I talk about writing technical prose, which is where I go right down to word choice. How do you choose what words you use? How do you build those words into sentences? How do you take the sentences from your first draft and turn them into shorter, clearer sentences? How do you take those sentences and turn them into paragraphs? Talk about lists and tables and paragraph-sized things. Then we take another break because everybody's baked by this point. Then I talk about writing in English as a non-native speaker. And I talk about tools that are available on the internet. I talk about common mistakes in English that non-native speakers make and solutions for them where that's possible. And then I talk about writing technical documents, which is taking the whole piece, so not just a paragraph here and a paragraph there. What is the entire structure of a document? In the generic, how do you lead a reader from a state of ignorance to a state of understanding? And how do the various pieces of a sort of generic conceptual document work together to do that? And then everybody's really tired and we all go away. And although I tell people that they can forget all the slides in the deck, this is the only slide that I make sure they definitely do not forget, which is Rule 0, which is that most writing advice is what you call guidelines rather than actual rules. And there are cases where I will have slides where I'll say, this is a Rule 0 slide. So for instance, passive voice. I talk about the passive voice. I talk about what it is. I talk about how the natural order of English is one way, and if you shift that around, then it's harder to read. And so I'll explain all of this stuff about the passive voice, and then I'll explain why you break the rule. When do you write a passive sentence? When is it important to write a passive sentence? Why do you do it? And so what I try to do is not just give them a bunch of rules, because that's boring. And developers, they want to know why. But they also want to know when is it a rule and when should I break the rule. And so I give them that, and then I give them permission to break the rules. And then I tell them if anybody takes after them for breaking the rules, they should send them to me and I will sort them out. And most people laugh at that point because apparently I'm scary. This is, okay. So, I've been doing it for 18 months. How's it gone? Has it been worth the effort? Yes. What I'm noticing is that the level of writing I'm seeing from my developers has improved enormously. People are writing shorter sentences, things are clearer and easier to understand, people are happier with what they're writing, it's easier for me to work with people and discuss stuff with them. Another thing, when I started the role, since there had never been an information architect, nobody knew who I was or what I did. Now I have a bunch of people that I've had the course with, and I've fed them cookies, because I always bring cookies to the courses. It makes people feel at home, and then they imprint on me, because I've fed them and I've taught them, and they know who I am. And so if they have a question or a problem, they come to me, which is perfect. That's exactly what I need, because I wasn't involved in the conversations I needed to be involved in, and now I am. But what else has happened is that overall, we've gone from the idea that documentation is something you do at the end if you can't avoid it, to documentation is part of our process. Documentation is something that we do, and it's something that we are capable of doing well. We, our developers, are capable of producing good documentation. I English stuff at the end, but honestly, the stuff they're producing is more and more good quality stuff, because not only do they know what to do, but they're confident in it and they're comfortable with it. I had some unexpected moments too that are really good. The first thing is, every now and then somebody will come up to me, and this is visibility again, and they'll say, so this piece of documentation, it'll be off in some corner I know nothing about. I was looking at it and I had an idea. And I'll go, oh, tell me more. Let's grab a coffee. And it always turns out to be some classic developer optimization. You know those moments where itchy fingers start and you're just going to fix this thing. And so I get to sit down and say, okay, so who are our users? Oh, they're going to be able to access it better here than they would there. That's excellent. How much work is it going to take? Can I help? And then I get involved in and get to hear about things that I wouldn't otherwise have heard about, because they know who I am. And then they find out that I encourage this behavior, and then they come up with more ideas. And so I'm not even starting everything now. Now most of the time I'm just waving as it goes by, which is really fantastic. Another thing is, every few courses I'll run across somebody who's really, really, really keen on documentation. Whether or not they're actually a documentarian in their job title or whatever, they love it. They enjoy it, they're good at it, they have opinions, those opinions are good opinions, and so I'm creating a community of documentarians. And we're basically turning documentation into something we think about, an axis of appraisal, of evaluation in our organization, which it wasn't before. And this is magic, this is great. And I mean, I can't take credit for it apart from being the person who sort of threw the rock over the cliff and then the avalanche started. But it's really fun to be part of it. Here's my year-end report, slightly updated, because I do a year-end report. So yeah, I've done 54 sessions now in 6 countries. I've had 344 students as of last Thursday, which was the last course I ran in Łódź in Poland. 34 native languages, ranging from Algerian to Yoruba. But here's a word cloud of the commonest ones. You can tell that we have an office in Poland. We have a smaller office in Belgrade. We have an office in Berlin. We have an office that I've been teaching in Ghent. And our Amsterdam office is full of a lot of different nationalities, is how this all comes out. I ask people to do an appraisal after the course. It's anonymous. About half the people do it thereabouts. I have never received a 2 or 1 star. It's almost all 4s and 5s. So whatever I'm doing, they like it. And that's fine. I'm okay with that. How has it changed since I started it? Because I started it kind of speculatively. I know I want to teach people these things. I've seen enough of our documentation to know that these are things that we should teach them. I'll make a slide deck. I'll start teaching it. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I did and how to do that sort of thing and how to learn from my mistakes. But what's changed? One thing that's really changed is I'm getting further and further into explaining why things happen. I spend a lot of time talking about cognitive load, and I actually have a slide introducing cognitive load, which is, of course, the effort that it takes to learn something. And I talk about how the bit that we can control is the bit that's the effort that it takes because of how the information is presented. Because there are other elements of cognitive load that we can't control, but that one we can. And so I find myself more and more understanding the rules of grammar that I had learned as rules as being questions of how difficult is it for this sentence, this usage to be understood by a reader. So I'm actually understanding more and more and able to explain more and more clearly to people who focus on why about how exactly these rules work and why they work the way they do, which is really fun for me and really useful for the people I'm teaching. Another thing that I've been able to do more and more is use my experience as a teacher to create norms around the behavior in the class. A classic example of this is when I start, the first thing I do when I'm getting the class to introduce themselves is I say, so what is your relationship with writing? Do you love it? Do you hate it? How do you feel about it? And then I get to tell a story which gives people an idea that any answer is acceptable. And I tell them about my student in Poland who sat back and folded his arms and said, I hate writing. I got into technology so I could stop studying Polish and stop studying English because I hate writing. And I mean, it worked out fine for him, but the other thing is, what that says to my students, I tell that story, and what they know, that's frozen up.
That's okay.
What they know is that there is no wrong answer. I'm not going to kick anyone out of the class no matter what they say. I'm interested in their honest opinions. So you can start to do that. You can start to tell stories about the other people, you know, who had what ideas about what the jacket exercise is about. That conversation we got into in Berlin about how many arms aliens have and where they're mounted at the same place so that you could get the jacket on. Also, I use the review comments for the same purpose. I hear about, you know, someone will say you're talking too fast. Someone will say you should read your slides. I pay attention to those and I tune the presentation that way. And what I discover from that is that you have to have review comments. You have to have somebody who's giving you continuous feedback, because otherwise you will stray slowly from the path and you won't know it. And the other thing, more and more, is that I find myself softening the message. I find myself saying, look, these are guidelines. If you just cannot bear to use the singular they, you can write in the plural, it will have the same effect. You know, if you don't want to use my particular set of rules for how you do bullet points, at least be consistent throughout your document. It's much more important that you get in the direction that you perfectly comply with the style guide that I've told you about. So as I get more confident, I'm more willing to, or more relaxed about flexing. And I think that's something that's very useful because it's very tempting when you're standing up in front of a group of people and you're trying to teach them to be really black and white about it, because that way you feel safe. But you have to trust your students, because it's not about you feeling safe. It's about them feeling safe. It has not all been perfect. There are some things about the course that are a problem, and there have been occasional incidents with students and colleagues that have also been a problem. And so these are things, fair warning here. You know, if you're going to do something like this, you're going to hit bumps in the road too, and that's fine. That's part of the process, is things going wrong. So in the course itself is kind of a problem in that it's a lot of information. It's way too much information coming at people way too fast with way too little interaction from them. And the reason it exists like that is very particular to my organization. I knew I was not going to be able to get more than half a day of people's time. And I wanted to get as much into their brains in half a day as I could, on the understanding they would forget a bunch and it would float back to the surface. But that's not the optimal way to teach people. So if you're in an organization, for instance, where you could have multiple sessions, you know, session 1, session 2, session 3, ABC, whatever, that would be great. I just knew that if I did it in my organization, then people would do one module and then they want to do module C because they didn't have time for module B, and I'd be mixing classes here and here and here, and nobody would get all the way through. So you have to think about that. The other problem with doing something with that level of energy and that level of zing, I spend 3.5 to 4 hours clowning around in front of the class in order to keep them interested. And I am goofy. I demonstrate the different ways to walk on the planet Dune in order to avoid a sandworm. I mean, I do all kinds of stuff. And it's exhausting. I come out of that and I'm exhausted. They remember stuff, and you know, I get a lot of 5-star things, and I just go. But I mean, it's fun, but it's exhausting. And then there are the problems with your colleagues, with students. One problem is sometimes you'll tell people, hey, you should totally come on my course. I think you'd find it fun. And they'll say, what is wrong with my writing? And by the way, if anybody ever does that, walk out of the situation. Just politely close the conversation off. Don't try to give an example because they will double down. And they will then try to prove that they are right and you are wrong. And there's no way they're going to go in your course already. You've already discovered that, so just walk out of the situation. Close it off as cleanly as possible, as quickly as possible, and don't try to go further. Also, you will find that there are fanatics. I mean, come on, we're writers. We know there are fanatics out there. They will turn up in class. They will have opinions. They will want you to agree with their opinions, particularly their opinions about how those other people are doing it wrong. They'll want to use you as some kind of a lever, some kind of a social hammer. And then they're the ones who pick it up in class and everything is black or it's white. And again, they try and turn me into a club to beat their colleagues with. But Abi said, so I guess I also said rule 0, where you're not listening to that one. So you're going to have a certain proportion of people who are going to take the guidelines as rules or laws of nature, and that's fine. Also, I do get a certain proportion of people who say, Abby, all of your examples are from science fiction, fantasy, and gaming, which is true, they all are. It's super geeky, because that way everybody stays interested, except for the people who say, but we don't write that. I would have preferred examples that are closer to what we actually write. And that's a good point. I have to balance their dissatisfaction against everybody else being awake. And the side game that some people run of trying to track down all of my references, and nobody's managed it yet. I do keep adding ones too. I'll read a good book and it's like, work that into an example. So what am I going to do next? So I already have one more person teaching the course, which is good because I have other things I need to do. I have the rest of our documentation to write, and I spend a lot of time on pull requests with my colleagues who are writing stuff. So I have a colleague in Berlin who's teaching it, and he's taken over the same slide deck, and we agree changes. But he's not nearly such a crashing geek as I am, and I know it's a little out of his comfort zone to be doing this, and he can't necessarily tell the same jokes, and so he's worked his own jokes in, but it's very idiosyncratic. It's very me and weird. So I think what we need is a 2.0, because I have another colleague who's he sat in on one of my courses in Poland. He's interested in doing something like it, but it is so far away from who he is as a person that it's not going to work very well. So I was thinking of getting a bunch of people who are interested in giving it together, because there are 3 or 4 other people floating around the organization who have said, hey, I would love to teach this. And actually doing a 2.0 where we rewrite the course, and we go through, and I treat my original course as a beta. We say, okay, this is idiosyncratic. Why don't we focus on the lesson here, and then we can each vary it as we like. More interaction, see if I can find more ways to ask questions rather than give answers, although that takes longer. If you start asking questions and gathering feedback, you have to build more time in if you decide to do that. And then have something that we can basically teach teachers, as opposed to saying, sit in on my class, and then I will sit and give the entire history of science fiction, fantasy, and gaming for the last 20 years, and then we will talk further about how you can work with it. Also, I have other courses. So I have a course on articles, the words the and an, that is pitched at native speakers of Slavic languages, because there are no words for the or an in languages like Polish and Russian and Ukrainian and Serbian and all of that. And as you saw from my word cloud, that's a lot of my students. So I have a separate course for that. People can take that as an adjunct to it. I have somebody who's interested in doing a course on writing articles and blog posts. I mean, she was interested in me doing it, and I kind of said, oh, that would be a great idea. I'll help you develop the course, and then you can deliver it. because I'm one person, and I think she'd do a better job. And I suspect more things will come up. And I'm open to writing more courses, particularly if I can shove getting this course off on other people as well, so that I've got some time to do that. So if you want to do this kind of thing, if you look at this and you say, I could do this, and I totally believe you can, how should you go about it? I would say one of the most important things is to design the course the way you design a document. So think first about your audience. Who are they? What do they know? What do they not know? How are you going to teach it to them? Because that is exactly what you need to do, is to treat them as people who don't know something, and you're going to teach it to them, which is exactly what we're trying to do with our documentation anyway. What I did, and I definitely recommend this, create a draft of the presentation. Talk it through a few times at home, rubber duck it a bit until you can make it come smoothly. until all the things where you hear yourself say, no, that's not what I want to say. Then what you should do is get a group of people together that you trust and like, and that trust and like you, and give that course to them. And then say, okay, be honest here. Tell me what you think, and then use that beta feedback to refine it into something that you're willing to give more people. Absolutely do this. It's so tempting to just jump in with both feet, but if you give yourself a review cycle, it will pay off over and over again. Another thing, and I've talked about this a couple of times, is that balance between time and content. How much time can you get with these people? What can you give them in that time? How can you give it to them in that time? Do you need them to remember every single thing you teach from the start? At that point, you're going to need to build in more time for interaction, as opposed to they're going to learn stuff, they're going to forget a bunch of it, and then it will have to float back to the surface, and you will then spend time later reteaching it to them. I always emphasize that this is the beginning of a relationship, not the end of a relationship. So we get into the class, I teach them stuff, but I need them to be coming back to me and asking questions when it's time for the next piece to float to the surface. So that's a really, really important question to ask yourself as you're designing the course. My choice here is probably not optimal. It's something that I'm still trying to figure out whether I'm willing to sacrifice content for interaction.
Have you thought of digitalizing it?
Have I thought of, sorry?
Of putting it online and making it like an online course people can take, or the interaction is important?
I have thought about making an online course or having some sort of a webcast sort of thing. A screencast, sorry, that's the term. But there is a lot of the interaction, and I guess I'm not ready to move away from the sort of hand-carved, artisanal, personal approach, which is what we're talking about there. It would make sense for me to do it because we have colleagues in Pune in India, we have colleagues in Taipei and like that. And much as I would love to travel the world, I have a life. And it's one thing to go jetting around to Poland and Belgrade and Berlin, which I do a lot of, take the train down to Ghent or Eindhoven, but beyond that sort of range of travelable things, it becomes a little excessive. So I've been avoiding thinking about it too much. But it's something that could be done. I suspect having it recorded would make me feel very tense, because then people could replay what I say. And I know that people can replay what I say in talks that I recorded here, but I still sometimes think maybe some of the stuff I'm saying is wrong, because I worry. If you're going to design a course,
that's why you edit.
Sorry?
That's why you edit.
Oh, absolutely. That's why you edit. But it's very hard to edit while you talk sometimes.
No. I mean,
edit the video.
You record a few sessions.
Right. Okay, and then
you edit and you cut together, and it looks
True.
Nice. It looks like it looks like I'm smarter than I actually am.
Make sure I'm wearing the same clothes
nice.
The whole time. the
same light.
All the best jokes.
That. That's a good point. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
It could totally be like Udemy or something like that, of course. Yeah.
I suppose it could.
I think a lot of companies are trying to do this stuff.
Yes.
So I would imagine it could be a really big thing.
Yeah, I should think about that.
Yeah, it helps if you green screen too.
Yes.
It's not just the same clothes. But seriously.
Yeah.
Like green screen background, you can put up slides or whatever you want.
That would be the slides. I had 97 slides. I did all that work on them. I should definitely show them. Picked out all the line art and everything. So if you're going to do it, another thing to think about is that you are going to want to keep people entertained, because talking about writing can be boring if you do it wrong. It doesn't have to be. It can be fun. It can be funny. You can work sort of a narrative arc in and a bunch of jokes and like that. Give yourself some themes, like visual themes even. My stuff is all line art and science fiction and fantasy stuff, but the line art is very prevalently a particular style. Motifs, and by that I mean actual concepts that are like a story arc through the entire thing. Talking about user focus in various different aspects so that it becomes almost like a motif in a piece of music. Talking about cognitive load at various points in the various places. Repeating phrases like bringing your reader from a state of ignorance to a state of understanding. Weave that stuff in too, so the whole thing has a thematic coherence, so that you're not just jumping from one thing to another, but they see how it all comes together. Also, yeah, make it memorable, make it relevant, make it funny. I have a ton of stories that are guaranteed laugh getters. And some of them are analogies or examples. Some of them, I've lived kind of a weird life. And so I have a fund of stories that really happened to me, and people are like, you what, really? The right kind of funny, though. And what I mean by the right kind of funny is if you tell jokes where somebody else is the punchline, that brings the wrong flavor into the room. You need to be telling jokes that don't give people the habit of laughing at other people, because then they'll start laughing at each other, and that brings the wrong flavor into the room. So, although I do occasionally make a joke about German capitalization, genuinely the only person that I reliably laugh at in the course is me. I'll talk about when we're talking about the writing as a non-native speaker, I'll talk about the disasters I've made of Dutch. That sort of thing is very, very useful, but if you start laughing at people, it just brings the wrong flavor into the room, so don't do that. The other thing that's really, really important is to make the entire thing feel achievable to your students. Sorry, I'm crossing the half-hour line here.
No, do keep going.
Okay,
It's
keep
awesome.
going. All right. Make it achievable. And that's why I have going around the table a couple of times where I'm saying, oh, look at that. There's something you already know. That's an excellent point. And I'd said in Prague, and I'll say it again, it's important to make sure that at least once in the course, every single person in the course has been called out for their insight, for their intelligence, for something they already know, for a good comment they've made. And you have chances when you're doing group exercises, you have chances when you're going around the table and saying, what's your experience of this, or can you introduce yourself for this, like that. But if you make sure that every single person in the room feels like at some point or other you have seen that they're intelligent, and you have told them that they can do this, eye to eye, person to person, they will come out of the class with a great feeling of capability. And that's the heart of this. Because if somebody knows they can do it, something like writing is so dependent on confidence. You tell people that they can do it, and they're much more likely to do it than if you didn't. It helps that we have really smart colleagues, and they're really capable of this. So all you're doing is expressing something that's already there. Talk about improvement, not perfection. I always say, I'm not expecting that you guys are going to come out of this course and you're going to write a piece of prose that is so perfect that I'm going to frame it, put it on my wall, and go drive a bus because I'm done writing, because it's the best thing ever has been written. That's not what this is about. This is about getting information from your head to your reader's head. It's not about the abstract perfection, it's about effectiveness. So you talk about that, and you talk about how improvement is what you were trying for, not achievement. And they'll see it, again, as something they can do. And this is all about that. And like I said, limit the number of things you can teach. And I do, actually. I have that much on punctuation. Nothing. Because I looked at it, and I said, that's the least important thing. So I will tell them there's a style guide, and they can go look it up, but we're going to focus on this stuff and not on this stuff. So make some ruthless choices. Here's the most important thing. What am I teaching? Who am I teaching? Am I teaching writing? Are you trying to teach writing? No. You're teaching people. Focus on that first and foremost. This is the one thing that I want you to take away from this. Everything else you can figure out. But the heart of this is if you decide to design such a course, you are not designing this course to teach writing. You're designing this course to teach your colleagues. Keep that at the heart and center of everything you do, because that is how you will reach people, and that is how they will actually learn from you. And that is the end of my talk.
Cool.